It was certainly refreshing to see Judith Collins taking the subject that she did by the ears and giving it a damn good shake at her speech at Orewa. I'm not going to talk about that this morning. I think it's been well discussed, but I do want to put our point of view towards what Judith Collins said, and probably nothing will happen because National are too bloody gutless to actually see any suggestion brought forward by Judith Collins, exactly as they did with Brash back a few years ago. But what I do wish to talk about is another harebrained idea from this government. Yes, another harebrained idea from a government that's absolutely full of them. Education has failed predominantly Maori and Pacifica children for over a decade. So what does this government do? What does this government of Cindy do? They abolish charter schools, which were producing great results, and unveil their solution, moving towards Te Reo becoming mandatory. See, this is what happens when you give power and influence to nutters. In 1996, school attendance was roughly 90%, which dropped to 62% in 2019 and 2020. Truants were predominantly Maori and Pacifica children. Last week, the government talked about the requirement for all teachers, for all teachers to learn Te Reo and Te Kā, because although they're not compulsory yet, the Greens, those bloody idiotic, toxic, lying Greens, and the Maori Party, which you can put into exactly the same description, have been pushing for several years to make them compulsory. Teachers must declare that they are developing and practicing Te Reo and Te Kā in order to renew their annual practicing certificate, but a Ministry of Education paper to Associate Education Minister Calvin Davis earlier this year said the Teaching Council was not applying a requirement to all teachers. Now, Davis knows very well this is the thin edge of the wedge. The government will put pressure on teachers to learn Te Reo, and those who disagree will leave. Hey? Well, come on. A teacher standing up for principles of right? I don't think so. A few might leave. If they had any guts, they would all leave. The Teaching Council Chief Executive, Leslie Hoskins, said that the requirement had been part of the teacher's professional standard for years, but this year the Council made it an explicit part of the recertification process. She said teachers must formally declare they have met the standard, and the principal or the manager of their early learning service must attest that that is correct. However, she said some principals or managers had not ticked the box to say a teacher had progressed their knowledge in Te Reo. Now, the teaching environment in general towards whatever this government wants. Teachers can choose to stick their head above the parapet to protest the futility, or they keep their mouths shut and leave teaching. Well, if all the teachers who had half a brain and the sort of teacher I like to see teaching my children and grandchildren, the ones that I'd want to see teaching them are the ones who would put their head above the parapet and tell these idiots at the ministry to go away and take a running bloody jump. But they haven't got the guts to do that. They really haven't got the guts to do that. So, what do? We see these nutters in the ministry and from this Cindy government going down a track of futility. Now, what about Pacific children or other ethnicities who are also struggling? How will learning Te Reo improve their educational outcome? Education experts can argue till the cows come home about the reason for poor educational outcomes, but no one disputes the statistics showing children are not learning anywhere near as well as they used to. Educational standards have plummeted. Despite a 32% real rise in per-pupil spending since 2001, students have gone from world-leading to decidedly average, in fact, very to below average. In reading, maths and science students now perform far worse than the previous generation of just 18 years ago. In all three subjects, 15-year-olds have lost the equivalent of between 3 and 6 terms worth of schooling. Far fewer pupils today perform at the highest levels. Far more lack the most basic proficiency. Worse, in the latest round of the OECD testing, New Zealand recorded the strongest relationship between socio-economic background and educational performance of all its comparator English-speaking countries. It should be no surprise to discover poor educational outcomes result from socio-economic issues, not ethnicity. It is too much for educational experts to ask Alwyn Paul for the secret of his success achieved by charter schools. Of course it is. Paul is on the wrong end of the political spectrum. Charter school attendance was up 90%, with 90% or more Maori and Pacific Island students, and the charter school student performed much higher than New Zealand's average NCEA results. And I can remember where I verbally supported the disbanding of charter schools, and that was a few years ago, and I wish I had not done that, but I had been terribly misinformed and brainwashed over that. And who had brainwashed me? The lefty teachers that we had back then. At any rate, the Prime Minister must be over the moon. She must be absolutely over the moon at the serious grooming of school children by this education system in preparation for soaking up her politics. Politics has been bending and shaping education over the last decade, and move towards compulsory te reo has nothing to do with improving educational outcomes for Maori, or in fact anybody else. The sad thing about the New Zealand education system and the people who work within the education of New Zealand, any of these crazy ideas unfortunately will come to pass. They have no barrier to prevent the teaching of any subject or promote any ideology that may have support from the PM's office or that crazy cabinet room. The school teachers have no bottle to fight for their credibility, or even the desire to have their profession released from the grip of the woke hijackers, including those crazies that make up the Ministry of Education. And this here is a wonderful description of the Ministry of Education. You need to take a hard look at the crazy Ministry of Education. They're not only woke, they are neo-Marxists and have been there for decades. Their mission is pure and simple: destroy young minds, period.